All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we've had some pretty good preparation for this panel, this session right now, which is going to kind of walk through our legislative ask, talk through the arguments we're making, and then go over some kind of tips and best practices for it's not that unique because we did it last year, but I don't think we'll do it next year. So all these digital Day on the Hill meetings, I think this is going to be, we'll need to kind of go over some of the unique aspects of that. And then again, one of our goals, I think, for this association is to include non-council member participants in the future. And so this could possibly be a way to do it, is continuing to have kind of a digital presence, continuing to make this available online for people who cannot travel to DC to take part in person. And so I think we're interested in hearing your feedback on what we did well, what we did not do well, ways that we can improve, so that we could continue to kind of build out our program and move this from something that we have a few hundred, under 200 people do, to something that we have thousands of people do, and see, whether that's possible. So I will begin by talking about a metaphor that was recently introduced by Chairman Price, who is the head of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Transportation and Housing. And he started talking about, the 3-track infrastructure program that Congress is dealing with right now, and DC in general. It's 3 parallel tracks. They're all kind of heading in the same direction, which is, addressing the state of good repair, funneling more money into infrastructure, and really kind of building out a 21st century transportation network, but also electrical grid, sewer and water, all these kinds of things. And we're going to focus on transportation here, and it involves 3 tracks. So the first one is fiscal year 2022, which is the transportation and housing budget. Again, the subcommittee kicked that off last week officially. I think they're drafting it right now. The second one is the American Jobs Plan, aka the infrastructure bill. We've been pushing for an infrastructure bill for many years now, certainly through the prior administration, and I think even when President Obama was in office. And the third track, finally, is the Surface Transportation Reauthorization, which I think we should all be fairly familiar with, because it's been going on for 2 to 3 years now. We've been talking about it for 2 to 3 years, certainly. So I'm going to go over each of these 3 tracks, and I'm going to focus specifically on this document, the Ask, because we've been giving a series of briefings to the council. We gave a background briefing to non-council participants of this week's webinar on Sunday afternoon. And so, everyone should have a really good grounding. We shouldn't be starting from zero here. Everyone should have a pretty strong sense of where we are in the process, where we are in legislative calendar. And so I want to focus this on specifically this document that we have put together for meetings tomorrow, that will kind of form the core ask that you'll be making, hopefully, to many offices within your state and within your region. So track 1, FY22 Appropriations. This is, I think, the basis, this table. It's the first thing we lead off with. It's going to be, I think, the first thing we have to deal with in the calendar, because right now, again, Appropriations Committee is starting their work, and that tends to be lead off in the batting order. We're asking for $3.878 billion for Amtrak. I think Mr. Flynn, Mr. Gardner, and Mr. Kosha did a very good job outlining what exactly that covers. We'll go through our talking points. Next slide. And then there's also the existing rail grant programs, which were passed by FAST Act, introduced by FAST Act. And so 330 million for consolidated rail infrastructure and safety grants, federal state partnership for state of good repairs, 400 million. That's double what was passed in FY21. And then restoration enhancement grants, that's about a 4x plus up. And so those numbers specifically, we advocated for, I think, more for CRISI. Certainly federal state partnership. CRISI can go to passenger rail projects, but also freight rail projects. It's developing new corridors. It's a US DOT administered grant. And it's been used, I think, certainly over the Chow DOT, the past 4 years, I think targeted in large part to short line freight railroads. I think with the Secretary Buttigieg, we're gonna have a much friendlier FRA for passenger rail. However, we worked with Representative Moulton's office and Representative Fitzpatrick's office to come up with an ask that we could all get behind. And so they really wanted to focus on, work that can be done on Amtrak's capital backlog. So they prioritize federal state partnership for state of good repair. That's some equipment issues, that's some on corridor issues, as well as a lot of station fixes. The good thing about it, I can say, is it's very much focused on passenger. So we don't have to compete with the short line freight railroads to the extent. Restoration enhancement grants, those have been used primarily for the Gulf Coast corridor. It's just not enough money. It's not authorized enough money, and certainly appropriators haven't filled the bucket up. And so I hope we get that money. I think the Gulf Coast can certainly use it. And I also think with the infrastructure bill kind of looming in the background, there's a lot of planning work that could be done through restoration enhancement that would kind of create a pipeline of projects. So going over the Amtrak specific categories, I think the message, again, we all need to reiterate, and we've heard it before, and I'm sure our chairman will hit it once more before we close out today, is things are looking better than they were a year ago, but we are not out of the woods. There's a lot of lost revenue due to COVID travel restrictions. Amtrak's still keeping the middle seat open, and safety precautions. A lot of states have said we're not ready to have daily service yet. We're not ready for both to pay for it, but also we're not sure we want those kind of vectors, and that's very uneven. Some of the state-supported routes are returning, but again, there's a revenue hit, and certainly from the Northeast Corridor specifically. So Amtrak's operations, we want to continue daily long distance trains. We want to get the Northeast Corridor kind of back up and running, and we want to get those state supported lines back up and running. That's all included in that $3.8 billion. 950 million, that 3.8, all by the way, also includes 915 million for national network equipment, along with 478 million for NEC equipment. That includes, Amfleet 1 and 2 refurbishments, Superliner refurbishments. They're going to do new diesel locomotive purchases and acquisitions, and doing some engineering work for the national network fleet acquisition process that we're all kind of waiting with bated breath for Amtrak to advance. So those are good things to highlight if you want to talk about kind of the equipment crisis we're facing. Also includes state and commuter payments, Section 209, Section 212. That'll be things like MBTA, New Jersey Transit, that access the Northeast Corridor, but also I believe Metra in Chicago, and potentially some Californian routes as well. Section 209, those are going to be your Heartland Flyers, your Downeasters, etc. And then, of course, we want to avoid any more furloughs. That's going to be an important thing to hit with a lot of congressional offices, because I think they are interested in keeping Americans working, and making sure that we're not shifting Amtrak workers to unemployment insurance, because that's a loss for the federal government, because you're paying people to not work. Kind of the anchor point for the FY22 Ask is the Moulton-Fitzpatrick letter. That's bipartisan. You should all be very familiar with Seth Moulton, Representative Seth Moulton from Massachusetts. He was kind enough to appear on a high-speed rail webinar. Representative Fitzpatrick has appeared with us at events in Philadelphia for Amtrak workers. He's from outside of Philadelphia, the Pennsylvania area, and he's Republican. So this is bipartisan. I just this morning, we delivered that ask from DC staff, from me, to 435 offices, House offices. We do need constituents to make the case to their elected officials, because it just means more coming from you. So we're up to 60 signatories. I'm not going to name them all off here, but you can review them, maybe take a screenshot, and we will try to get those out to you later during whatever follow-up email we send in advance of your meetings. It's not just about Amtrak and intercity rail. We also like to support transit rail. So at least 11 billion for transit formula grants, capital investment grants, at least 3.8 billion for the new starts, small starts really more focused on rural, but new starts, it's kind of that heavy rail line that you see, Sound Transit, that kind of thing. Because DC's transit system, WMATA, is within the federal jurisdiction, we always ask for 150 million for the Metro Rail, as well as raise grants, which are kind of a iteration of build grants, which formerly were Tiger grants, and those are kind of innovative grants that look at multimodal transportation, and passenger rail is eligible. So we like to highlight that. One last thing, and this is not going to be a point of emphasis, but I think it's worth thinking about in relation to the infrastructure bill, is Amtrak has identified an initial 1.55 billion in investments in capital projects specifically that they could advance very quickly. Call them shovel ready, shovel worthy, whatever you want to do. I think they are shovel ready in the sense that Amtrak could advance them very quickly. This is in line with the funding that the House passed as part of the Moving Forward Act, also known as HR2. We'll talk more about that in the coming sections. And I think you can certainly say this is within authorizer's intent. I do not believe the appropriators will spend a lot of time taking this very seriously. So this is more about a kind of a messaging that like Amtrak is ready to go. And if you wanted to create good paying, family wage, blue collar jobs across the US, Amtrak is a good vehicle for it. I'm going to stop there briefly and see if we have some questions that I could get to. We do have some constrained time here, so we can't go forever, but I will try to get to a few of them. And Maddie and Joe, I think the way we're going to do this is you're going to raise your hand if you have one, and you're going to deliver it. You're going to we're going to turn on your camera and unmute you, and you're going to ask the question, so that it's not just an hour of me talking at you. We can have a conversation here.
Yeah, so if anybody in the audience has a question, please use the raise your hand function, and I will I'll be able to unmute you so you can ask your question directly to Sean, and everyone can hear. All right, Mr. Chilson, George Chilson.
Sean, a lot of the money in this ask relates to things that are heavily oriented toward the East, and political perspectives, as I'm sure you're aware, are highly parochial, particularly in the South. My representative will be San Diego. I'm sure that they could be less interested in the Washington area transit authority. So of all of the points you're making today, which ones would you particularly emphasize for people in the West, California and East, probably all the way through Colorado and Kansas and things like that? Which parts of this would, because I think we can leave maybe 3 or 4 points that they will remember.
Right.
What would you emphasize most for those of us not in the Northeast?
Well, this is going to get complicated, specifically with you, George, and you know, I know how you feel about allocated costs, and we will address that later in kind of the reform proposals. But we can see 2.2 billion, 2.3 if you round up, for the national network. That includes a lot of not just long distance, but the state supported needs, because states are still hurting right now. There still is kind of this, the recovery is on its way, but a lot of the tax revenue that is used to fund these services, it isn't there yet. So I would focus on this national network figure of 2.2 billion. Keeps the long distances daily. It keeps those state supported, many of which are on the West Coast and the West, the Heartland Flyer, Cascades, you know, et cetera, and Midwest as well. And in addition, you know, we did try to highlight that kind of $915 million national network figure. So I would focus on that as the lead, and then keep George's question in mind as we go through the next 2 tracks, because I think that's going to give another good opportunity for us to think about how do we get outside of the Northeast corridor only mentality that is far too often dominates passenger rail policy at the federal level. Next question, Joe.
All right, Bruce Ashton, you are up.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. In preparation for my talks tomorrow, I basically trying to keep it within a 30-minute time frame or less. And as such, I've been looking at all the proposals that we have here, but basically I'm focusing on having an outline using the legislation proposals or our ask list. What I don't have is a good way to give them the financial budget numbers that you just reviewed. I am thinking that the best way for me to handle that with my participants is to refer them back to you, Sean.
Yeah.
So that you can give them a better, more concise, understandable format than I would be trying to do rambling over the phone.
Right. And thanks for the question, Bruce. We will get into that in a little bit later on, but we are providing people a PowerPoint deck. We are providing people with the legislative ask, that table I showed. We are providing people with the one pager, of course, so that, you know, you could email to them, point them toward the hyperlink and say, do you want to look at something while we talk, so that you know the figures. I also think, again, the Moulton Fitzpatrick a sign-on letter for House members only, of course, is a nice organizing principle because it includes our dollar for dollar amount, what we're asking for the 3 grant programs plus Amtrak. However, the point you're making is a good one, and it's when in doubt, connect them with staff members, and that'll be me and Joe primarily, because we are your support staff. We appreciate you guys taking the time out of your schedules for free to do this, and so we're here to make sure that it's a successful one. So if you feel like you want to connect them with us at any point, don't hesitate. Joe, let's get one more question, and then we got to move on to the next one. Otherwise, we will become.
All right. So after this question, I have the option to lower all the hands. So I'm going to lower everyone's hands after this question, so we can get to the next segment, and then everyone, we'll come back to this again. So Clint Richmond.
All right. Good afternoon, Clint Richmond from Massachusetts. I'm a big proponent of public ownership, and I'm always asking what kind of programs we have for states and Amtrak to acquire track. But I was also, as I put in the chat, and well, I guess I don't know what kind of funds there are for that, but I know that's always a difficult ask. But I just was wondering around an idea, because I'm not an expert on this. I'm not an expert on rail law or so forth, but it seems like we should have more strings attached to some of this federal funding for freight railroads, and so that it's more of a cooperative, the government gets some benefits from it. So I didn't know if the idea has ever been explored about when freight railroads receive federal money, that they have to provide trackage rights for passenger rail to Amtrak or the appropriate state DOT. Is that something that's feasible?
That's a good question. We're going to cover a little bit more on some of the policy sections later, having to do with surface transportation. I will say that the class ones have traditionally been very wary of accepting federal dollars for precisely the reason you are outlining, which is the expectation that the recognition that it opens them up for to the argument that there ought to be kind of some public benefit flowing from this money. Now the short lines have where because they're short lines, there's very little, for the most part, margin in Amtrak accessing the routes. They've been much more open to it. I think service outcome agreements are going to be one of the key challenges we have to launching new services, to launching new corridors. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I don't know that class ones are a good avenue for that, because they just don't accept that many federal dollars. All they really want to do is maintain the status quo with the Staggers Act, and kind of throw legal obstacles to new service. I will also say that Amtrak does, they do have statutory right of access. That was part of the grand bargain in we're on the 50th anniversary, so 1971, was we will take the passenger service off your hands, and in return, you will grant us legal right of access and preferential dispatching. It's been a long time that I think a lot of the people who work in the railroad don't feel like they particularly need to honor that bargain, but it's still in effect and still the law of the land. So I think that's kind of the case that we repeatedly make. And we'll talk a little bit more about access. And what I would do also is, and I don't have the time to get into this in the detail that Danny Flower did, but Clint, I think you may have been on yesterday's webinar with Danny from Virginians for High Speed Rail. He laid out a very good kind of overview of Virginia's acquisition of the CSX corridor between DC and Richmond, and I think we should look at that as a model going forward. However, at this point, funding is far insufficient where you would kind of be able to pursue that nationally. So moving to track 2. the infrastructure bill. Now, this could be, you call this any number of things. The American Jobs Act is what is the first pass that the President Biden has come up with. I think if you talked to Chairman DeFazio right now, he would say the surface transportation bill is the infrastructure bill, and that's how Congress is going to act on it. But for the, if the White House is asking for $5 billion for the Northeast Corridor, $2 billion for the national network, $2.5 billion for passenger rail grants, $1 billion for freight rail and safety grants, then I think we ought to make sure we hit that in our ask. And so we included the annualized numbers. And so this is the president's the president's outline of the plan was $80 billion across 8 years. And so this is the annualized version of that. The other thing I think we want to outline when we talk about infrastructure bill is the Amtrak Corridor Development Program proposal. I think it's an important part of the solution to expanding the passenger rail network. It's certainly not going to be the case in every state. I think the Virginia, for instance, having just mentioned that, I think they are more than capable of administering their passenger rail program. California, New York, et cetera. But there are many places where Amtrak could come in and very quickly with kind of upfront capital costs, with covering the upfront capital costs of launching a service and those access rights that we just talked about, kind of catch us up in regions that are really underserved. I'm going to really briefly go over the elephant in the room, which is budget reconciliation. And that could be a key vehicle for advancing an infrastructure bill. If we don't get to 60 votes in the Senate for the White House plan, if we don't get to 60 votes in the Senate for the surface transportation reauthorization, I believe congressional Democrats are going to look long and hard at budget reconciliation as a vehicle. I would recommend you don't be the first to raise this strategy when you're in your meetings tomorrow, particularly if it's a Republican office. I don't think it will probably, kind of turn off a switch inside the head of whichever congressional staffer in that Republican office you're talking with. Here's what I would, if they raise it first, I think your response should be to tell the truth. And the truth is, we believe the surface transportation reauthorization is the preferable strategy for addressing passenger rail investment and reform. And that's true because a lot of the policies we're about to discuss in track 3 with the Amtrak board, with on-time performance, those are policy questions. They're not budget questions. More money is helpful, but it's not the only thing. And so if we want to address a lot of these problems, then we do need 60 votes in the Senate, and we do need a surface transportation reauthorization. The second thing you say, and this is to Democrats and Republicans, doing nothing is not an option. And so we've been talking about infrastructure for too long. And if the Republicans don't like the American Jobs Act, if they don't like HR2, whatever replaces HR2 this year, then whatever replaces the Moving Forward Act, then they need to come up with something serious that invests not just in roads and bridges and highways. It can't be just a paving bill. It has to be something that gets passenger rails and transit as part of it. So I think doing nothing is something that is kind of resonant. It's certainly, I think it's something that Senator Manchin, who's going to be like one of the key votes in the Senate, it has said. He obviously, he wants to do it in a bipartisan fashion. He's very, very centrist there in West Virginia. But he understands that, it can't just be, we can't get 60 votes, so we're not going to do anything. Again, I will stop right there. And let's take 2 questions.
All right. I'm going to butcher this. I apologize. Bharat, I apologize.
It's quite all right, Joe. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. One quick question that came to mind, and this may not be the exact place to ask it, but I'm going to ask it is because this may be something that will be asked, is what I'm guessing, especially people like Andy Harris. I'm from Maryland, and he represents the Eastern Shore. And somebody alluded to that, saying that they're from the South and they don't really care about the investments happening, around the nation's capital. When it comes to high-speed rail, how are we going to, or has there been any talk about how are we going to pick the stations and also maintain the same, the high speed definition of things by not just skipping over a bunch of stations? So is that something that has been discussed? That's it. That's a question.
I don't know that I have a good answer for you, unfortunately. I mean, I think those are going to be very region specific, very state specific debates and conversations. I think later on I'm going to talk about how to counter the argument that even within the 80 billion plus up that the White House is saying that they want on top of the baseline, there's still not enough money to implement true high-speed rail, which is true. But I do think, the way we talk about it, it's a down payment. We're not going to fund an entire national high-speed rail expansion in one bill. And so you can address that. I think for specifically the Northeast Corridor, which is much further along than a lot of the other routes in the US, there's going to be some kind of pretty vicious fights that will happen. I know that in Connecticut right now, there's a fight brewing on that kind of the coastal line versus, do we carve in? And you got opposition on both fronts because you have the inland route that's saying like they're going to they're going to run trains through where? Let's build a tunnel, even if it like triples or quadruples the price. And then you have the people along the coast who are saying, well, hold on, are you leaving us behind? Are you walking away from us? I do think, broadly speaking, there's a role for us to, at the national level in DC, we just have to defer to our council members who are in the region and their kind of opinion, but also work with stakeholder groups at the state level, regional groups like ASPA, REARP, et cetera, to kind of build a consensus on questions about how you route corridors. I think Rick Harnish at High Speed Rail Alliance has a really good deck that he's developing where he talks about how you build out a network and how we need to socialize the idea that a high speed spine can benefit you even if you are not on it through feeder lines and the understanding that you may be on kind of a conventional speed siding, essentially, that feeds into the high-speed rail spine, but through network fluidity, through added frequencies, you will benefit. So I would say that's my best attempt at answering that question. And I'm sorry that I don't have a tighter answer for you. Joe, let's get one more before we have to move on to the next one.
All right, Jason Lee.
Thank you. So yesterday, Sean, you mentioned that the Biden plan and Amtrak Connect US vision, which we heard a lot of this morning, are different. And on one side, you have both of them together. If you go back a couple of slides, does this mean that we are endorsing the Amtrak Connect US plan, or are we supposed to say that this is a step in the right direction, especially if we think it's not complete?
Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I picked up like every other word there. Maybe Jason, maybe if you type it. I don't know. You can yeah.
It looks like Jason did submit it in the comments. I can read it to you if you'd like.
Okay. Yeah, Matt, if you'd do that, it'd be great. Because
Yeah. Let's see. Yesterday, Sean mentioned that the Biden plan and Amtrak Connect US vision are different. On one slide, you had both of them together. Does this mean we are endorsing the Amtrak Connect US plan, or are we supposed to say this is a step in the right direction, especially if we think the plan's not concrete?
I think you say it's a step in the right direction. That's I think my understanding of the policy, and we're still formulating, because I think what we're excited about is that Amtrak is talking about new services, that they are talking about aggressive system expansion, that they're not, just, I guess 3 years ago, we had a president and CEO who was talking about, well, we don't think our, these longer routes, we don't see our future there. And so it seemed like there was this plan that we're going to break up something like the Empire Builder, and then reallocate those resources on either end onto the short distance corridors. They have moved very firmly away from that in response to public outcry, in response to congressional outcry, which I think in large part we played a leading role in developing. And so we ought to applaud Amtrak for having for altering their vision in a way that is more beneficial to existing Amtrak served communities. I know that that's not the perfect map. It's certainly, I know that there's a bunch of long distance lines like Florida, Chicago, that people really want to see. We're working closely with the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority for the North Coast Hiawatha. I know the Pioneer, the Desert Winds, all these discontinued routes. They certainly make a lot of sense, and so we're going to have to take the lead on those routes, and we're going to have to work with the states. And I think you can point to the need to defer to local entities, to local stakeholders in a lot of these route planning decisions. I know Amtrak did, where possible, try to incorporate all local rail plans, and I keep coming back to Virginia, but I think that's a good one. I think the Heartland Flyer extension, that's something that local advocates have been working for us. And so those are included. To the larger point about how you talk about the Biden plan and the Amtrak 2030 map, those are, I think, the Biden plan is one of those tracks to get to a destination, and the 2030 map is Amtrak saying, here's what we think a destination 10 years in the future could look like with enough funding. And it's certainly not the only path there. We're going to need, again, an appropriations bill this year. We're going to need a 5-year bill. But we also, the Biden plan is kind of like saying, okay, we haven't done anything in infrastructure for like 20 years. So let's do a sprint right now. Let's do a sprint that closes the gap. And hopefully that answers your question. I'm going to move on to the next track. And we will have another opportunity to talk about some of these when we talk about Hill meetings, time permitting. So we have outlined, again, we have broader menu of surface transportation reauthorization ideas. I know some folks have been developing their own, and we've tried to accommodate them where possible. This is based on the idea that you have to kill your darlings, and if you could only fit enough legislative content for one double-sided 2-pager, like what would you include? And so we went with the proposals that we've developed that have gained traction among the committee and TNI and among certain Senate offices and certain House offices. So the first one is the Passenger Rail Trust Fund. That's been a long-term goal for us. And so, by the way, just to be clear, these are all on the one pager. And so I just want to make sure you have kind of the background to talk about them to congressional offices. But so Passenger Rail Trust Fund, Senator Blumenthal and Representative Davis are leading on that. No bill number yet. It's $5.4 billion per year. And that's a 60-40 split between the national network and the Northeast Corridor. George, I'm not sure if that kind of helps when you think about, how do we make sure that people, how do we make sure that offices not on the East Coast understand that there's something in it for them? And this is one of those ways. On-time performance and fairness for passengers. Given the dramatic rise in host railroad interference, we've talked about this. Stephen and Bill both talked about this. We need to address it. This is a way we address it, and it creates a private right of action. The DOJ has right now the onus lies on the DOJ. They've only acted once in the past 50 years of Amtrak existing, and so we want to give Amtrak the ability to go to the STB and say we are being unfairly treated, and our statutory right of preferential dispatching, which already exists, is not being recognized by this individual railroad. Transparency in pricing for state-supported services. This is something that we have played a lead role in drawing attention to. There was a pretty good, I think it was very good actually, I think it was Trains magazine article, perhaps it was Railway Age, someone can correct me in the chat if I got it wrong, where they pointed to our white paper, which is developed, I believe in large part, under George Chilson's overview, talking about all the flaws in the cost allocation methodology, the lack of transparency. And so we have had some states reach out to us and say, we want to work with you to get some principles passed. We are focusing on kind of some ensuring that we shift from use of fully allocated costs to direct route costs, so to reasonably reflect relative use, and then also just helping offices understand that there should be a clear relationship between service level decisions and state contributions into the system. So less service, more service there should be a very clear direction in which way your billing goes. Of course, one of the bigger things is to incentivize growth. So it shouldn't be that, the states are viewed as the revenue opportunity for Amtrak. It should be ridership. And so I think that's something we can work with, and it's been a long time goal for our organization. Creation of new services. We kind of talked about this. If we're going to move quickly and expand quickly, we can't just rely on DOT administered grants. There needs to be a corridor development program. At this point, Amtrak is the one proposing that. We are supporting their proposal. There's not an office yet who has stepped up and said, we're willing to kind of be the lead sponsor on an amendment or draft language that would enact this. We will keep you updated as that moves along. But again, I think we need to socialize the corridor development program, help people understand that it is separate from the Biden administration's infrastructure proposal, but that it is one possible vision for expansion. We also want to update and clarify the procedure for Amtrak to access host railroad infrastructure. We got this included in HR2 last summer, and that passed the House. We want to make sure it's included again. What this does specifically is it says within 90 days of Amtrak or state, Amtrak and the state really, applying for access to a route owned by a freight railroad, the STB shall determine the additional trains, whether the additional trains would unreasonably impair freight transportation, and then determine if it determines that it would kind of impinge freight movements, determine a fair price. And so it puts a timeline on it. It creates a active partner within the STB for expanding the passenger rail network. And that's going to be super helpful for us, not just for something like the Gulf Coast, but also for North Coast Hiawatha, Florida to Chicago, all these kinds of things that we want to get on our, add to our program. This is a necessary part of that. I also want to just emphasize for people, I've been hearing that this is kind of if HR2 was a new hope, then this year could be the Empire Strikes Back, because the American Association of Railroads, the AAR, the freight railroads have been engaging in a very strenuous and active campaign to roll back some of those wins that we secured in HR2. And so it's very important for you to emphasize OTP fix, advanced by Durbin, and also this update and clarify the procedure for access to host infrastructure. So those are under attack right now, and we want to make sure they don't get peeled off. Finally, and I apologize for going long here, but these are important and I want to get to them. Oops, sorry. Intercity Passenger Rail Commissions, Representative Cohen has been working with Transportation for America and our office, and they're going to drop language, I believe this week. And so they're going to, the language would incentivize the formation of up to 10 passenger rail commissions and provide states with matching operating funds of up to $500,000 per year per applicant. And then it tasks each commission with promoting intercity passenger rail, commuter rail, passenger service, and expanding the intercity rail network throughout the region. I think it's really useful and I saw this in a question earlier, but sometimes you have a state's legislature that is hostile to passenger rails as a kind of mode for various reasons, some having to do with the Koch brothers. And sometimes it's just they're indifferent to the needs of either a section of the state that might be on a usable passenger rail corridor, or maybe to particular cities. Maybe it's kind of, you got the rural urban divide or vice versa. So I think this is a really good tool. I think there's going to be good buy-in from the Transportation Committee, but we want to make sure that we are supporting that. There's more SurfTrans proposals. As you can see, there's a lot of complicated ins and outs, but these are important reforms. You can find them at railpassengers.org/ledge.resources. And I encourage you to take a look at them. Now, before we get into honing our messaging for tomorrow's meetings, I did again want to just take a moment and open the floor to, let's say, 3 questions about reauthorization. If you could keep them specific to reauthorization, that would be helpful, because again, we will be talking about the meetings tomorrow. So there's still room. Joe, if you could.
All right, Chuck Larrabee.
Let me unmute myself. Sean, this list is slightly different than the priority list that we had identified in one of your meetings. I think about this, Chuck Larrabee, New Mexico, by the way. But this list is slightly different from the list that we got in the council meeting, I think about a week or so ago. And I'm wondering how to handle that. I mean, the trust trust fund is in there. But for instance, the Amtrak board reform that was number 4 on your previous list is not in this list. So how would you recommend we handle that with the staffers that we've already communicated our previous priorities to?
Well, what we did was, this has been an iterative process, and I think the Amtrak board reform right now, we're trying to work hard with that in the Senate, where it hasn't really caught fire quite yet. But there's no real hostility. It's just it just doesn't seem to be fully socialized. But it's in good stead in the House. It's in good standing. And so we've kind of wanted to focus on new ideas, or ideas that needed greater buy-in, or that we felt perhaps were under attack by the lobbying forces of the combined freight railroads. So that's why there's a different list. I think I would encourage you to go look at the surface transportation reauthorization principles that we put out, which is its own 1-pager, and look through and be ready to talk about all those ideas. I think, again, I don't expect a lot of opposition necessarily to something like the Amtrak board reform, but it's certainly a good idea, and we want to see it passed. And so if you have time to get through it, you should definitely cover it. But you can also just, what we asked you to do is send both the legislative 1-pager, but also the surface transportation 1-pager, and make sure that that document is getting well circulated. So hopefully that answers your question. I will also say, food and beverage working group, that's another great proposal. I don't think it's particularly endangered at this point. And so, I think T&I supports it. I think the Senate Commerce staff supports it. So we didn't really make it a point of emphasis, if that helps. Next one, Joe.
Steve Strauss. You can unmute.
Unmute. Hey, Sean, would you talk a little bit about the concept of increasing the amount of money Amtrak pays the freights for using their right-of-way? I mean, some people have come around to the thought that instead of banging heads with the freights on these issues so much, you could just pay a little bit more for the right to run on time. California and Virginia kind of already do this.
Right. I've heard that described as capital renewal payments. And yeah, you're right. Virginia, California, they have established pretty strong working relationships with the freight railroads. I think that what they do is they kind of sit down over maybe 5-year horizon and say, okay, what are you going to put into your track, and how can we supplement that so that we maintain maximum network fluidity. I also know that there are some just troubles that come with Amtrak getting kind of cut rate access to host railroad infrastructure for what's presumably their top tier of service, because they're supposed to get preferential dispatching. That is not always the case, of course. And in fact, far too often they're getting pretty crappy levels of service, and they're just left on sidings, and you're getting into station 10, 12 hours late, even with a healthy padding in the schedule. But one idea is okay, for the long distances, would we propose maybe a pilot program where you increase the access per train mile, access charge for train mile, and I forget the specific figures we quoted. So I won't hazard a guess, but I think it's an interesting idea, because what you really do want to do is have the freight railroads view passenger services as a revenue source, not a liability, where they're just saying, you know, but a big part of that is like one train a day. You're not going to get that. You know, I think you need to increase frequencies and increase the stability of funding. What we heard, what Jim gave testimony in the Pennsylvania House Democratic Policy Council, and one of the things the Norfolk Southern rep said was, we don't know where state funding is going to be a year from now, much less like 10 years from now. So why we can't plan around it. And so that's kind of a passenger rail trust fund that you need certainty. Another issue, and you know, we've raised this with the House Committee on Transportation, and had a tepid response, is they are very aware of what precision scheduled railroading actually means. And it doesn't mean like, oh, like we're going to use computers to like forge our way boldly in the future. It means, you know, running longer trains, trying to get rid of as many labor agreement employees as possible, and kind of rating the store to pay yourself now and not investing in further capital programs down the line, because the whole thing is about year over year share increase in shareholder payments. And so I think TNI is very skeptical about this idea that, okay, we're going to give a bunch more money to a bunch of railroads who aren't even maintaining their trackage sufficient to their needs. How is this just not going to be? And this kind of gets to what I think Clint was asking, which was like, how do we get good value for money? And freight railroads are like, well, we'd rather just go down to a one-track railroad and run 10-mile trains, and even if we're serving less people, if our operating costs go down quicker than our revenue, then we're doing our job. So there's a lot of problems, but I think, you know, something we should talk about, and I don't have a solution yet, but I think one of the first things we can do is get, you know, predictability in passenger rail funding. One more question, and then we can kind of go on to more prepping for tomorrow's meetings.
Okay. Tom Gersh.
Can you hear me?
TJ, yes, I can.
Excellent. So this is sort of an overarching question, and largely for some of the people who maybe haven't done these meetings as much as some of us have. But we've just been sort of deluged with a lot of stuff here. And so any tips or feedback you can give on how you can pick and choose a couple of things, how you filter all of this for a 10 or 15-minute meeting, and just pick the most important things, which I think is going to vary from one meeting to the next. You know, so how do you make those calls? Thank you.
Such a perfect segue. I couldn't have planned anything better. Okay. What we have done is based on the fact, what we try to do is use this one pager as a map for an in-person 20-minute meeting. And we look at like, okay, what can we talk about realistically within 20 minutes while still leaving time for questions to the staffer. You know, I think because there's no cost for printing, and because there's no, I mean, we could technically just go on forever and ever because pixels don't really cost that much, but we did try to keep it to that one-page format for those reasons. And if you go to ledge.resources under the one-pager section, we have come up with a PowerPoint deck that you will be able to access through the website You can use Google Slides to edit it, and we do encourage you to edit it, but there are 4 specific slides that cover kind of the spending portion of it, of the ask, since that is, again, kind of the first batter up on deck. That's, I don't follow baseball, you can tell, because I think that is not the right way you say that. It's the first up. Is right now we gotta get rid of, we gotta knock down appropriations and figure out what we're gonna spend this year, and think about how that interacts with the infrastructure proposal. Surface transportation, they're drafting that right now, but we still, that comes a little later. And so the first 4 slides in that PowerPoint deck, that's kind of our idea. Like, this is the core of every meeting that we have today. And then we give some other 1-pagers to kind of develop a personalized message. So if you are talking to Representative Payne, who is the new chair of the rail subcommittee on TNI, you'd obviously want to include some talking points for the Northeast Corridor, even though, of course, they're well versed. But if you are talking to someone in Kansas, Senator Moran, for instance, you're going to bring up the National Network and Rural Links 1-pagers, which, again, we've included as slides. And in fact, I don't know if it's technically too difficult to kind of show you. Can you guys see my screen?
Sean, if you're only sharing your presentation, we'll be able to see the website pop up.
Right. Let me just share sorry. There we go. So this, these are the slides that we came up with. So it's the table, why is Amtrak like $1.8 billion higher than we have traditionally funded it? Some of the other passenger rail grants, and then just real quick kind of infrastructure bill, and then directing them to surface transportation. So railpassengers.org/surface for our reauthorization principles. Then we have come up with, and you can see this, Joe, right? I'm not just scrolling for no reason.
Everyone can see it. Yes, Sean.
Okay, thank you. We have come up with, this economic engine of growth. If you're talking to Republicans or someone who's Chamber of Commerce minded, talk about passenger trains as economic engines for growth. And so you could just grab 1 or 2 of these slides, whichever one kind of grabs your attention. We also have passenger trains and energy and climate solution. Now that is, very much on the mind of the Biden administration, of someone like maybe Senator Markey, someone who lives in the Northeast or California, where they're dealing with all these wildfires. Climate change is a big point of emphasis. Probably don't want to go talk to Senator Cruz about energy and climate solution. So, we give you a number of tools. We've given you a couple of slides to choose from. However, if you don't want to go that far, if you want to keep it simple, which sometimes that's the best way to do it, because, these first 4 slides are going to be, can't go wrong with them, because those are the top priorities we're kind of pushing. And then everything after will be cherry on Sunday. I felt, okay, so hopefully there will be opportunity for you to ask questions about this. Let me go back to my PowerPoint so that we can advance. Because there are some interesting, so yeah, you can see here, I kind of highlighted passenger trains, climate solution. We have a slide deck for that. Here's an important thing, and I think this is going to come up during a number of meetings, is because passenger rail has a higher profile, once you get through that kind of Amtrak FY22 Ask, the grants, the Moulton Fitzpatrick letter, and then you start talking about, and of course we support the infrastructure bill outlined in the American Jobs Act. Get through those first 4 slides, you might hear some of these arguments that we've been hearing. So we wanted to share them with you and kind of have a conversation. And so I know I'm going long, but maybe Jim, if you could, Jim or Ken, if you don't mind, if we go a little long, because these are kind of worthwhile, I think, to cover. So I apologize.
They're absolutely worthwhile. Let's keep going.
Okay.
I'm in total agreement. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So passenger rail only makes sense on the East Coast. We heard this in the THUD appropriations hearing, I think just last week. Time is bleeding together now, but it wasn't that long ago. Secretary Buttigieg did, I think, a good job of saying, well, listen, I'm from Indiana. We wanted rail in Indiana, in rural Indiana, because it's about connecting residents in our communities to economic opportunity. And so those are baked into all the meetings. I think you can also say, 20 million of Amtrak's 32 million annual riders are on state-supported and long distance services. Some of those originate on the Northeast corridor, but certainly they go off corridor, and they are, so the majority of passengers are off corridor. Or on a service that goes off corridor. You could also talk about, California having 3 of the top 5 routes by ridership pre-pandemic. I don't know where it is now. It's an interesting question. And Sacramento, LA Union Station, and Chicago Union Station all being in the top 5. Another one is we just spent trillions of dollars. We cannot afford to spend money on passenger trains, passenger rail. The thing I would kind of highlight here is that the alternative will cost more, and there's a lot of spending that we've done specifically around COVID-19 that had to do with keeping people with paychecks who've just been fired, kind of non-traditional forms of spending. This infrastructure spending is going to create long-term value. And there are places that are realizing very quickly, and it's certainly more than there's ever been before, that we cannot pave our way out of it, that we're running out of places for new runways. Passenger rail just has to be part of the solution. And you can point to some place like Virginia that is saying, we are leading without any federal support because we just need to act now because our population is growing too fast and we need a solution for congestion. We need to focus on traditional infrastructure like roads and bridges. This has been kind of a red line that the Republicans have been pointing to when talking about the Biden plan, because the Biden plan includes a lot of spending on, maybe like schools, a lot of funding for what they call healthcare infrastructure. I'm not going to get into the merits of that case, but I think we can all say that there's nothing more, traditionally that you would view as part of the U.S. infrastructure scheme than passenger trains, since the Transcontinental Railroad. And now I had a member who I think attended, I think it was council member because it was after after the Wednesday brief. I'm sorry, my memory's getting a little muddled. He sent me a note saying, like, let's make sure we don't either call passenger trains the original infrastructure, because obviously postal roads preceded that. And let's also make sure that we don't focus too much on how old the technology is, because we don't want to make it seem like, 20th century technology. That's been some of the criticism leveled at that from people who either are arguing in bad faith or have never been on a modern high-speed rail system. But yeah, so it's important to remind people that this is blue collar construction work with 50, 70, 100-year returns on this investment that we're making right now. This last one, it's kind of, we're getting it from both sides, which is, the first one is just high-speed rail doesn't work in America. Just look at California. And we are also getting folks who are saying this isn't enough funding to actually do high-speed rail. These are tough to combat because there's frankly a little bit of truth in both of them. California high-speed rail will certainly say there are many mistakes we made. And if we could do it over again, there's a lot of things we would do different. The other is, if you want to actually build out high-speed rail in the US, you need to do something like Representative Moulton outlined, which is $205 billion, which is certainly orders of magnitude higher. It's twice as much money, and it's for high-speed, devoted to high-speed rail. But I think what we do is for the first part, for the anti-high-speed rail, by way of California, you just kind of say, we're not going to be good at this unless we invest resources, unless we invest human resources. There has to be some, administrative capacity that we build up. There are certainly lessons we've learned from California that we can apply to the rest of the nation. And California specifically is spending a lot of the state money and to learn these lessons. And it's time that they had federal support. And the first thing we need to do is build that central spine corridor, and then we can reevaluate. But if we want to accomplish some of our mobility goals across the country, we can't afford to walk away from a project like that. The other one is, I think you would call it, and Secretary Buttigieg says this, so I'm just going to steal this line. It's a down payment. So we didn't fund the entire expansion of a high-speed rail network. We certainly, it's not going to be high-speed rail coast to coast, probably ever. We could tell what the future will bring, but certainly not with any of our lifetimes. And a lot of the rail, the corridors we're going to build out will not be high-speed rail, but that's okay, because what you need is, you need to slowly build up high-speed rail spines. And you can see between DC and Richmond, we're doing that. We're trying to do that between in the Central Valley right now. And then you're going to have a bunch of conventional feeder networks, and they're going to create a highly functional passenger rail network that a lot of people use. And it's going to provide a safer, more efficient, and more energy efficient way to move around the US. I'm going to stop for a minute and see if we can't. I want to let people kind of offer additional input into the arguments I've outlined that we've received, to kind of share and help people refine their message. And also, are there other arguments that I haven't outlined here that you've been hearing out in the field? And Joe, if you could just kind of.
Sure. Howie Stein. Howie, you can unmute.
Howie, just press your space bar.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay. There's now more high-speed rail in Morocco than there is in the United States. which doesn't speak well to our use of the available technology.
You've been reading our one pagers. I like that, Howie. All right, next up, I think Bharat raised his hand.
Chuck Ricks first.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Chuck.
Okay. Only thing I was going to add another argument to make with regards to it, and I know a lot of you guys have heard this before from me. There are certain areas of our country where high-speed rail is not an option because of geography. How in the world you'd ever get high-speed rail through the state of West Virginia, I really don't see it ever happening. And there's lots of other places in our country where that is the similar situation. Think about Colorado, west of Denver, for another example. And so I think we need to be emphasizing transportation that is available for people in all areas of the country.
It's a good point. And certainly I think that will resonate. I would factually, I think China's building high-speed rail to like Nepal. So if they can get through the Himalayas, we could get through the Appalachians. But I think in terms of making a near-term case, you're spot on. Next one, Joe.
All right, Bharat.
Bharat again. I have two things. This can be a discussion for later, but I just wanted to put it out there. I have directly worked on a project that dealt with storing marked trains during off-peak hours. So on a national level, not Amtrak per se, but that's something that the transit agencies need to work with Amtrak for that shared space to host the trains, because you got to park them somewhere once they get to the cities. I don't know how VRE handles it. VRE does have a yard where they have worked it out with Amtrak, but it may happen across the country during off-peak hours. And the other thing is last mile concept. I mean, transit-oriented development, we're talking about all this stuff, but how do you get that last mile service has been a topic on other forums. And that's one that I had to carefully answer. That's all.
Those are good points. Yeah, and it's kind of why we tried to include the transit side of the funding equation in our ask. But it's these systems really do feed each other and support each other. So thank you for that. Next, Joe.
Jacob Adams.
Sorry. So one thing I wanted to get a better sense is, which for part of the presentation, I was thinking that I should focus on the first two tracks and then just provide the other one, the third track on surface transportation as a background, the thank you, or would you prefer us to cover all three?
Yeah, I think the first formulation is preferable. And that is, focus on kind of the funding aspect and then point to say, we have a number of policy provisions, and then kind of point them to staff for that. Now, of course, if you want to pursue that over a longer, these are just longer conversations. You're not going to knock out a surf trans strategy in a single meeting. You can only raise issues and then can kind of continue to have the conversation going forward, which I hope all the participants kind of do that, but make sure to include us at the staff level in those conversations, because again, these are just iterative processes. Involves a lot of intel sharing. You got to go through and figure out where the commas go. Whereas with the funding thing, it can be, you can point to the top line and say, this is important to us. This is a point of emphasis. And this is kind of the direction we want to go for the next 12 months, et cetera.
Paul Shore.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, I just wanted to respectfully disagree with Chuck Ricks about the whole question of building high-speed rail through difficult terrain. It is true that on the Amtrak system, there aren't a lot of examples of that sort of thing, but there are a few if you know where to look. And there are examples off of the Amtrak system. For example, in 2010, I rode the high-speed rail between Madrid and Barcelona in Spain, and it was amazing how similar the terrain was to the mountain terrain of the Southwest Chief Route in Arizona and New Mexico. The difference was that they had just overcome, in the Spanish example, they had overcome the terrain through sheer expenditure just by willing to spend the money for the cuts and the fills and the bridges and so forth. I've also seen an example in Eastern Canada of a relatively lately built railroad line where the railroad line was perpendicular to a series of mountain ridges, and it just leapt from one mountain ridge to another with these huge bridges. It can be done, it just costs a lot.
Right. Well, I think you just said it right there, which is it's more expensive. So, and that will be certainly a a counter argument for people. So it's Chuck's point still stands, but you guys can debate offline. Thank you, Paul. Let's go, Joe. Why don't we do like 3 more, and then we gotta move it along.
Okay. Virgil Payne, you are up.
Hey, my question is on the One Rail partnership that we have. Are we still trying to find? I know we talked a lot about undoing things, maybe being lobbied against us, perhaps. Are we still trying to get to a cohesive ask, perhaps as an industry? I mean, because I can imagine a congressional office here in Freight, last week had their day on the hill, right? This is ours, and where is that? Is that something we can maybe get into more as an organization? That's my question.
I can share the One Rail Ask. I'm not 100% clear where we are, which iteration we're on. In terms of like substantive funding issues, I don't think we're quite there yet. I think they're not, the freight railroads are not going to ever support a tax increase for business. And so a lot of the pay-fors that you might think, or either perhaps on the American Trucking Association. I shouldn't speak too quickly. I don't know. I'll have to follow up with you, Virgil. I think we certainly continue to have conversations with One Rail. We hear briefings from congressional committee staff, and we try to speak with one voice on rail issues. But of course, that always just means that we have a very narrowly focused kind of program that we identify as part of the One Rail Coalition, One Rail Coalition platform. I do think they have generally been supportive of plussing up existing passenger rail programs. Their staff has been very helpful in helping us deal with kind of some technical questions, and so this is not super helpful. It doesn't respond to your questions, but I will follow up with you offline, I suppose. That's the best way to do that. Next question, Joe. Question or comment?
Mr. Ricks, once again.
No, don't worry.
Okay.
I'm used to that.
All right. Cool. Are we done, Joe? Anyone else?
Yeah, you got Sean. You can continue.
All right. So just real quick, and then I'll turn it over to the chairman. Preparing for a digital day on the Hill. Again, that is kind of it's a very specific thing we're doing. I don't think the majority of us will be doing it next year. There's certainly value in sitting in a physical space, sharing a physical space, and handing someone a sheet of paper and looking them in the eyes. but there are things that we have to plan around to accommodate the digital kind of online nature of this week's calls. It's not just tomorrow, it's all this week. But we have tried to give you the tools to organize within your region. Joe has been sending out regional updates so that you all are on a single email thread, but identify, pre-existing interactions with the office, share intelligence. A lot of these corridors cross state lines, so you want to identify local projects and issues that you would like addressed during the meeting. There are, of course, $10 million per office allowance for kind of congressional earmarks, which returned this year. And so I know I've heard examples of Lackawanna cutoff, I believe was one of them, where they're going to have a coalition approach multiple offices along the lines that we hope you consider this important project for earmarks. And the idea is that you could split some of that 10 million allowance across the entire corridor, so you wouldn't overburden a single office. You want to designate a meeting leader in each Zoom meeting. So this is the person that's going to dictate the tempo of the meeting. They will open the call, and they're gonna hand off the baton so that you don't have necessarily everyone talking at once or uncertainty about who's going to deliver what ask. Towards that point, you want to script out your talking points. So, go through those first 4 slides that we kind of have been talking about, or if you don't want to use a PowerPoint, go look at the one pager and kind of just go through and highlight the important points that you will hit, so you can check them off. And then this is always, something we remind people every year, but make time to ask questions. They're going to have valuable intelligence for our efforts. A lot of them, like I said, all of them on the House side, at least, should have received our request from me this morning talking about the Moulton letter. So, these are things that they might say, oh yeah, I just got an email from the Moulton letter. You don't need to go through FY22 Appropriations. And then you kind of ask them, okay, well, is there anything we can help you with? Is there any priorities that the congressman or congresswoman is pursuing in the district or the senator in the state? And so find out what they care about, what is on their radar, and what questions they have because the whole point is we want to be a resource to these offices. Work within your tech comfort zone. I'm going to cover this briefly in the next few slides, but just know that you know how to turn on the video, mute yourself. If you want to share the PowerPoint, try that out beforehand. Only use the service you had a chance to only utilize a service that you've had a chance to use before. At this point, I think everyone's pretty well up to speed on Zoom as a platform, so I would recommend using that. Of course, there's also just you can always just call them if they give you a number or if they provide a conference line. Try to deliver materials to staffers ahead of time so that they have a chance to review things, so that this can be a lot to take in. Many of these staffers will be young. Many of these staffers will have many different things within their portfolio, many issues. Passenger rail might be a small part of it. And you just kind of want to go through, give them an opportunity to go through and familiarize themselves with some of the concepts that we are socializing here, so that you can have a constructive conversation. Remember to say thank you. A little appreciation can go a long way in cementing your relationships with an office, and especially since everyone is as Jim said, living at work right now, I think a lot of people are frazzled. A lot of people, there's a heck of a lot going on in infrastructure. And so anyone who's dealing with the transportation infrastructure side of things is probably balancing. We're trying to keep 10 or 15 or 20 balls in the air right now. And so I think a little appreciation for them being a civil servant of sorts is going to be appreciated and remembered, hopefully. Finally, just ask for help. Me and Joe and Maddie are here to help you out with questions, with problems. So don't hesitate to reach out to us and let us know if you need anything. Zoom, again, I think we're all pretty, there's a tutorial that Maddie has provided, but just ensure that you are familiar with muting and unmuting camera on and off. Follow their lead in terms of what is preferable. If they have their camera off, you can leave it off. It's fine to just talk. Sometimes it's helpful to look a person in the face, but at this point, I think, again, everyone's pretty Zoom fatigued. Be prepared for the camera to be on. I don't think you need to wear a suit and tie. I've been through, I don't know how many hundred Zoom meetings at this point with congressional staffers, but plenty of them, since they are working from home, are just wearing a button-up shirt, maybe a pullover, maybe a blouse, so it's not exactly super formal, but remember, you are representing the association here, so something better than a t-shirt. I'm going to end there because I've gone on really over time here. If there are any questions, we've covered a lot of them. Ask us. Communicate amongst yourselves. Again, we want to know what's kind of going on out there, but we don't want to be a choke point to a lot of the communication that is happening at the regional level. So if you're unsure what is happening right now in your state, just reach out to the other people in your state and say what meetings do you have scheduled, and see if they need help covering. We're here for you. So again, I hope we have a very successful day on the Hill, and I hope to get a lot of meeting reports. There will be a meeting submission form that comes out to you. Let's do it. Let's set a goal for ourselves to send it out tonight so that you have it ready for you for any meetings that happen tomorrow. But yes, that making sure there's a flow of communication back to the DC office is going to be a huge benefit. And with that, I will turn it over to, I believe, Jim, or maybe Ken.
No, it'll be me.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Take a breath, Sean. Good job. Seriously, gang, this is the fourth legislative brief or pre-brief that Sean has done since last month. So I know that this has been quite the slog for him, and I just want to make sure that we publicly recognize Sean and Joe and Maddie. The whole team has just been burning more than the midnight oil to put all this data together for all of you to use. So thanks for that. Really well done.